I'm Mike DeGuire, Vice Chair for Advocates for Public Education Policy, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar this evening. We're very excited that you're joining us from here in Colorado or wherever you're at. The topic of our webinar this evening is the hidden money shaping school board elections. For those of you in Colorado, of course, we are dealing with school board elections across the state in many of our school districts. And we're so lucky tonight to have a speaker who can talk about the influence of money in elections, especially related to school boards. The A for PEP group has been working almost 10 years to try and fight for what we call equitable public education. Our organization is a statewide coalition of individuals and grassroots organizations that work to educate the public and our policymakers to make sure that our public schools work for all. We have webinars and resources and good information on our website. We encourage you to check that out. Those of you who are listening in tonight, you'll be able to submit questions that we'll be getting to at the end of our webinar, which will be in about 45 minutes. After I introduce our speaker, we'll get started. And again, thank you for being here. I'm really excited to introduce Alyssa Bowen, who is the Deputy Executive Director of True North Research. She's also the Director of the Equality Project at that organization. That organization is a progressive watchdog group that helps lead a team of brilliant researchers that shines a light on the regressive forces that are attempting to take away our freedoms and erode democracy. Alyssa received her PhD in history from the University of North Carolina, and she also is published in a number of journals, The Nation, Rewire News Group, Ms. Magazine, and in Truth Out, where she's a regular contributor. I was lucky enough to hear her presentation with the National Education Association on the impact of the billionaires in our public education system, and I would recommend that highly, by the way. This webinar will be videoed, and it will be on our website at the end. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Alyssa. We're going to have a conversation, Alyssa and I. She'll be sharing some information, and I'm going to be asking her a few questions about this whole topic of dark money, which we've heard about for years in our federal government races, in our state races, our local races, but unfortunately, it's also impacting our school board elections. And so we're going to need to get some background as to what dark money is all about. And so that's what we're going to start off with. I'd like to just first say, welcome, Alyssa. Thank you for being here. Maybe if you want to just say hello, and then we'll start with the background question, which is, what is dark money and how is it used to influence elections?
Yeah, thank you. It's such an honor to be here. I've listened to quite a few of your webinars to see what they're all about, and I'm just floored that you exist and are helping protect our schools. Let me just share my screen. So as Mike said, first I'm going to be talking a bit about what dark money is. So dark money groups are groups that take in money from different sources. They're often individuals, corporations, or other groups that they keep secret from the public. So that means the public's unaware of the identity of who's funding these groups and the agenda behind them. It can be sometimes that one source provides the vast majority or even all of a group's funding. And then in turn, those groups spend that money to sway voters about political candidates, to influence public opinion, or lobby politicians about public policy. So as you can see on the screen, it's sort of a never-ending cycle of influence. In the context of schools, for example, Moms for Liberty, which I'm sure many of you have heard of, they've taken in millions a year in revenue, and only a small fraction of that has a known source. In terms of what form that can take, often these dark money groups are 501c nonprofits. But as Mike and I sort of discussed earlier, it can also be PACs if the funding from the original source is not disclosed. So if some dark money organizations are funding the PACs, even though PACs are required by the FEC to divulge their funders, the original funder is not known if it's a dark money source giving to the PAC. So it's a lot of convoluted designations, but essentially, if it's difficult to find out and they keep the original source of the funding secret, then it's a dark money group. A little bit of context about how we got to this dark money ecosphere that we have existing right now in the United States. Um, a lot of this can be tracked down to the Powell Memo, traced back to the Powell Memo, which was written by Lewis Powell in 1971. He wrote this memo that became a blueprint for essentially controlling US power structures. Powell wasn't just some random guy. He was a lawyer for big tobacco. He wrote this to the US Chamber of Commerce just before he was nominated to the Supreme Court. And in this memo, he urged corporations to promote an extreme free market view of our Constitution, using think tanks and investing in universities and in the judicial system in order to sway the law to corporate benefit. And decades, almost 4 decades later, with the Citizens United ruling in 2010, this sort of culmination of decades of work came to fruition. Essentially, the benefits of that were seen when the Supreme Court ruled that money is speech and therefore political spending could not be limited. And this unleashed a tsunami of dark money into elections.
Yeah,
And
that chart that you have there in the middle of your screen, that's significant. Well, I can't see that number on 2024. How much is that? Billions? Wow.
yeah, billions. Yep.
Okay.
So almost 3 billion. And then this last image here I have of January 6th. It's at first glance might be difficult to understand why I put that image there. But I think that the unleashing of dark money since 2010 has, I mean, obviously undermined democracy, but the attempt at stealing the 2020 election and protecting Trump from any legal ramifications from that attempt was a central outcome, I think, of this dark money influx. So not only were dark money groups like Moms for America, who helped organize this, and Turning Point USA, who shipped busloads of people across the country to DC on that day. Not only are those dark money groups, they also kind of highlight the way that um, attacks on our democracy kind of coalesce around also attacks on public education, because Turning Point USA obviously has its own Turning Point academies, which they are trying to promote and do a lot of attacks on public education. And Moms for America, we can discuss later as well, but they're kind of a more behind the scenes, less well known, but more extreme version essentially of Moms for Liberty. And these groups were funded by Public's heiress Julie Fancelli, and yeah, she also funds Moms for Liberty, or has funded Moms for Liberty. So I want to talk a little bit about the major factions, because I think it's really important to understand how we got here. So obviously, I think the decades-long fight against public education has been more libertarian oriented initially, with Charles Koch and his oil fortune funding a lot of this since the 1970s. But with FreedomWorks and his various dark money organizations. So that still continues to be a really important funding source. But there's also, MAGA and the far right have become a really influential part of this infrastructure, as well as religious authoritarians and theocrats. Leonard Leo and corporate enablers. I definitely don't want to ignore that. I think that's a really important part, especially if we're talking about ALEC, American Legislative Exchange Council, and some of these other more corporatist groups. And Project 2025, like you could see how all of these different kind of ideological sects coalesced in Project 2025, because almost all of these organizations shown here were contributors to Project 2025.
Wow.
Um, so actually, I want to go back to this slide because I want to talk first about some of the major men. So, Julie Fancelli was a big funder, but a lot of these are very wealthy men. So Leonard Leo is probably the most famous of besides Charles Koch, of the individuals I'll talk about. He himself is not a major funder, but he controls a trust that is a $1 billion trust that was bestowed to him by an anti-abortion billionaire, Barry Side, a couple of years ago. And he runs, even before that $1 million or $1.6 billion influx to his network, he had essentially $600 million at his disposal that he was throwing into dark money schema that was trying to take over our courts. And essentially, his work with the Federalist Society, where he's co-chair, and his work with other nonprofits like his Concord Fund have been hugely influential. And now that they've taken over the Supreme Court, his network has looked to other avenues, especially education and the media and entertainment. That's a big push for him. And his Concord Fund is also known as Free to Learn. Its fictitious name is Free to Learn. It's another group that's attacking public education. Um, and so he's a really important person to know. Dick and Liz Uline are major GOP funders, but they also are they're majorly impactful on the courts and also in education. You might have heard of American Principles Project, which has I believe I think APP is the one, or it was that or Restoration PAC that gave a ton of money to Moms for, or to 1776 Project Pact, which we could talk about later, but they're a major funder of school board far right school board candidates. Charles Koch is maybe the most famous man behind the Coctopus labyrinthine network that is attacking our democracy. He claims to be a libertarian, and says that he supports reproductive rights and abortion rights, but almost every single candidate he and his network have backed have been anti-abortion and anti-freedom, essentially, even though they use that word in a different way. But he is still a major player, of course. His Yes, Every Kid is involved in a lot of school privatization efforts. And he's been a funder of Heritage Foundation, and they also funded Moms for Liberty.
Before you leave that slide, if you could go back to it, I recognize the name Americans for Prosperity because advocates for public education policy worked very closely with several legislators a few years ago to try and just upgrade our laws in Colorado related to charter schools. We had an accountability and transparency bill that was proposed. It went to the Education Committee. It was discussed. It did not get out of committee. But interestingly enough, there were dozens of lobbyists that worked against the bill. This was just for transparency and accountability for charter schools. And Americans for Prosperity had 11 lobbyists that worked against that bill. I just noticed that name. Just thought I'd point that out from a local perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. No, that's so important. And Americans for Prosperity is basically his flagship operation. So he does a lot of his support for far right candidates. And also, I guess they're also getting into Democratic primaries, which is terrifying.
Yeah.
And then the final person I'll talk about is Jeff Yass. He might be the least known of these characters, but he does a lot of anti-public school work. He works on the courts as well. He had kind of promotes far right or far right judicial candidates, but he also has been involved in local efforts for vouchers in Pennsylvania and Texas. So he's also a major player to keep an eye on. But back to what their goals are, I think that these kind of sects that I talked about here, really, it shows how they overlap a lot on this slide because, I think there's a lot of ways of organizing this roadmap, but I think these are the three that I would identify as to demonize our schools and teachers, promote privately managed alternatives, so via promoting vouchers, ESAs, or creating their own charter schools or promoting homeschooling or pods. And then also controlling what kids are taught. And I think this is true in both the public and privately administered schools. So a part of that is taking over school boards, public school boards. Part of it is pushing curricula both in private schools and public schools. And in public schools, that would be like via their chosen school board candidates. And then I think a major part of this also is that there's groups like Parents Defending Education and Alliance Defending Freedom that are, you know, issue complaints or file lawsuits against schools and teachers for what they teach in schools or for policies that promote equity, like racial or ability equity. And so I think that, and there are groups like ALEC too, American Legislative Exchange Council, which we can talk about more later, but they promote they promote state level bills that push almost all of these at the state level. So, they attack teachers' unions by by promoting bills that say teachers can't get benefits unless they disenroll from the union or these kinds of things. So, and they also have created their own ACE, which is called American Council and City Exchange, and that's their local version of ALEC, where they also try to like coordinate far right school board members and help them out. So there's a lot of overlap here, and I think that all of these sects are are supporting this roadmap, like demonizing schools and teachers. You see like Moms for Liberty coming out and saying like that our students are dressing like furries or whatever. And that's promoting, that's attacking schools and demonizing schools. It's also like a lot of times promoting biblical, supposedly biblical, what they say is a biblical vision of schools, which yes, and the homeschooling pods thing also, that's and promoting like privately administered schools, like that's not only taking money away from public schools and pushing into private schools, it's also encouraging privately managed like Christian or religious schools that can teach essentially what they want. So there's a lot of overlap here. And here are some, just to get to some of the bad actors and sort of lay them out for people so they can see which see them if they come up on flyers or whatnot. So probably the most known one is Moms for Liberty, which I mentioned, Moms for America. The bolded ones are ones that I have seen involved in school board races. Parents Defending Education is more like the legal arm of this movement. So like I said, they kind of issue lawsuits to, scare, intimidate, or otherwise threaten school boards into doing what they want. But then there's Freedom Works Best, which is another Koch-funded organization. They train school board members. American Legislative Exchange Council, which I've mentioned. Leadership Institute is another org that trains school board members. And then 1776 Project PAC, which I also mentioned, they will endorse school board candidates at the local level, put that out through their Substack and social media. And then they also like give donations. They sometimes do mailers for candidates. So you can see 1776 Project PAC on mailers sometimes. And then you can know that historically had been funded by a Uline entity. And then I'm sure y'all are familiar with Heritage Foundation, which was the organizer of Project 2025. Yes, Every Kid, which we mentioned, was a Koch entity. And then these last two, National Parents Union and Democrats for Education Reform, which I think is better known as DFER, like these are entities that present themselves more, I think, in progressive areas or blue states or blue cities. And they often use inclusive language or progressive language like inclusivity and equality for children to promote charter schools, ESAs, like pushing tax dollars to private alternatives. Um, and so we see more, this is like maybe a more nefarious way of undermining public education, but I don't think it's, less harmful. And it's yeah, so I think it's really important too to like keep those in mind. So if you hear something from these groups that sounds like it should, like it's right, just know that they also, I know National Parents Union gets Walton funding, so heirs to the Walmart fortune, they get funding from them. They get funding from the Gates Foundation, which is a big school privatization source. I don't know, Mike, you probably know more about who funds DFER.
Yeah, no, that this chart is so enlightening and so relevant to Colorado as a state. As you know, or maybe you don't, Colorado, because of our legislation that we've had over the past 20 years, has one of the most favorable charter school laws in the country. And we have 15% of our students that are in charter schools, which is the second highest percentage in the country next to Arizona, although there's states that are catching up. The Democrats for Education Reform is very relevant for Colorado. In 2015 and 2017 in Denver, the dark money group, or the independent expenditure called Raising Colorado, received most of their money from DFER. And that was at that time only a half a million. Since then we're up in the 2 million range in our Denver Public Schools election races because of the dark money influence. And the Heritage Foundation is connected with 4 or 5 of the charter schools here in our state, which are ascribed to their curriculum and teach their curriculum. So this is very relevant. And Moms for Liberty, of course, has had significant influence in districts in the Colorado Springs area and other places across the state. And ALEC has been the model bill making group for some of our legislation. The Innovation Schools Act in our state was modeled almost exactly in some ways after that particular legislation that they proposed. So this is both enlightening and of course worrisome at the same time. But thank you for that chart.
Yeah. Yeah, I will say too, so I think we've talked about a lot about like Christian authoritarians and libertarians. And then I think there are also folks who stand to gain monetarily, almost directly through privatization. So I know Mike has written about this locally with Denver Families Action endorsing a slate of candidates in 2023, and their C3 arm was founded by charter school networks.
Yeah.
So, and that's, Moms for Liberty has had a donor who's a foundation that its like parent company was, uh, a private school like digital firm. So they make money when public schools get demonized and money gets funneled to private schools as a result. And then TPUSA also I know has gotten funding from charter schools. I'm sure a lot of these orgs have, but
Yeah.
those are just some of the ones that I know about. And so it's also like a grift, in this world that we are living in. There's plenty of that to go around, but it's important to know that that's also happening with the school privatization kind of push too.
Yeah. Thank you for that information. So let's dive into some of the specifics in terms of how this all plays out. Uh, we've got these organizations that have goals of their own. They provide the money, if you will, to other organizations. How does it work? I mean, for instance, the names, for instance, right? I noticed in the Denver situation, we have names like Parents for Great Schools. We have Denver Students, Families, Teachers United for Excellent Students, and all these phrases come up. Why do they come up with phrases, and how does the money go from one group to another? In Colorado, we've been hit since 2017 with a group called City Fund, which is funded by Reed Hastings and John Arnold. Reed Hastings founded New Schools Venture Fund, which you may have heard of, and he also supports the KIPP organization, Aspire Public Schools. John Arnold's an oil executive from Texas who gave $1 million to Republican candidates last year. But they have an organization where they're trying to promote, charter schools and charter-like schools across the country in about 20 to 30 cities. And they give this money to these organizations, and then they turn around and they do something with the money at election time. But they come up with names. I mean, in Denver, it's called Better Leaders, Stronger Schools. That's the name we've had for the last 2 years. But how does the DART money stuff play into that? I mean, why is it called DART money, by the way?
I think because it's hard to shine a light on exactly who's behind everything. I think that's the gist of it. But I think yeah, as to your question about the naming conventions, it is really interesting. It's almost Orwellian, but they part of, I think, I didn't talk a lot about amounts of money, and so the amounts are staggering. I mentioned the $1.6 billion that Leonard Leo got, but they can spend this money in so many ways, and I think a major way they spend it is PR and messaging, and they really are good at messaging. I will give them credit where credit's due. Excuse me. But they have an impressive PR infrastructure. Sorry.
Yeah,
That they appropriate and weaponize kind of neutral language, or language that is actually, positive, like parents and families and moms. And so when people hear it, they're like, oh yeah, I'm a mom. I like liberty. I'm a mom. I like America. I'm a parent that defends freedom. And so it's something that just from a glance you would support. Free to learn also is Leonard Leo's. And so I think when people just see ads, they're like, oh, okay, free to learn. Okay, they're supporting this candidate. I'm sorry. Why don't I
right.
give it to you for a second?
Take a minute. It's fine. The other interesting dynamic, as you alluded to, the money end of it and the grift, if you will. The corporate education reform seems very different than the ideological education reform. And I may have misspoke earlier about the Heritage Foundation. I think I meant Hillsdale College. Hillsdale College, if you can explain that group a little bit and then maybe clarify that for us. That's the group that I think has their own curriculum that they're working on, that they try to propose around a very conservative philosophy around not just studying the classics, but with respect to historical knowledge. Again, shifting back to that, as you're okay with your water.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm in there. Yeah, Hillsdale College. Yeah, they create their own curricula that they push around. And they have had like a lot of far right, like because they originated as like their own physical college.
Right.
But then they like bring a lot of like conservative firebrand people there to be professors and speak. But yeah, now they're creating their own, not only curricula, but I think that they're trying to found their own charter schools.
Schools. Yeah, they have. They've done that for some time. So we're dealing with the issue. I'm just going to jump into it with whether or not the governors in our country should opt into a federal voucher program. Now, you've been talking about privatizing education. You had the word vouchers on one of your slides. We know about the conservative movement in with respect to the critical race theory worries. You mentioned the negative conversations that people have had to push back against teachers and what was happening since the pandemic. Why and how is the voucher movement coming into play? There's 18 states that now have universal or near universal vouchers. They're mostly what we call red states. But all of a sudden, we have a federal voucher opportunity on the table. And is this because the DART money has worked and they've convinced everybody that public education is failing and therefore we have to somehow leave the public education system? I mean, what's at play here, and how do people address that?
Yeah, I don't think that according to the polls, they have not convinced people that public education is bad. The polls overwhelmingly show that parents and Americans generally support public schools and support public school teachers. But I do think that in some red states they have one. I think ALEC has been really impactful in getting voucher bills and ESA bills and other privatization bills passed in red states. Um, I do fear now that, yeah, Trump isn't going to stop with threatening universities also to adhere to their far right curricula. I think they're also going to force blue states to and withhold funding to blue states if they don't adhere to like far right curricula and anti-DEI measures and other things. So it's I don't want to. I'm not one to promote hopelessness.
Yeah.
I think there are other ways that maybe we don't have to depend as much on federal dollars, but that's going to take a lot of work and restructuring. And I think for now we're in sort of a dark place. And in red people, I feel for people in red states who don't share these beliefs because it's not just the schools, but lots of policies being shoved down their throats, and it'll have real impacts.
Well, I think you made an excellent point. The majority of parents, especially, support their public school system. And the reality, while I said that 18 states have vouchers, vouchers have never passed in any kind of vote that has been on the table. In Colorado, they've been trying to pass vouchers since 1992. They've never passed. They didn't pass with Amendment 80. The public does not want to see, in general, our public education system dismantled. And in many ways, they've been hoodwinked, misled, or confused about these alternatives that are being put forward because they've elevated, as you pointed out, the discrediting of the system. And the major corollary with that is the defunding of the system that's happened because our public education system has not been funded as well as it could or should be since the recession. I think that's when things really started going downhill. And if you want to talk to that, that's fine, because I think that plays a big role in this whole issue of where the money ends up going to, as you said, these education companies and these groups that are making money off of the $1 trillion we have in public education, as opposed to going directly into the public education system. And if you want to share any thoughts on that, please.
No, I think that's such a good point, and I think it's used right by some of these progressive language groups that are trying to privatize schools. There are shortfalls in our public education system's not perfect, and it's our job to fight to make it better. But I think also these groups, these privatization groups, using progressive language around equality, because we are seeing a lack of equality, of racial equality, and a failure to fully fund uh, disability programs and other equity programs. And I understand why parents would say, I don't want to send my kid to, if they hear that there's an alternative to that would actually support their student, or they're in a district that's underfunded and they want to send their kid to a charter school. I understand why they would think that that's the route to go. And it's obviously disingenuous in most circumstances with these groups it is. And and further defunding the public schools and these programs that is only contributing to that, which is unfortunate.
There's a new organization called the Colorado Schools Fund here in our state that was formed with a $50 million. And their belief is that there's places across the state where the public school is, quote, failing the students. And so they're going to provide training to start new schools. Charter schools are the latest thing is micro schools. Micro schools are becoming, the buzzword, allowing money to go towards the authorization of a little, place you'd set up in a shopping center or in a home or somewhere where you're going to be teaching. The question that we're having is, why does this continue, and why is this happening in a way that seems to not understand that the value of giving that money directly to the public schools? Is this because the people behind this are determined to break down the public education system? I mean, is that their only goal, that we don't have a system that's for the public good versus a private decision-making point for parents just to pick and choose where they want to go? What's the dynamic there?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting question. I think for a broad segment of the school privatization movement, that is the goal. I think defunding schools for the public good is what they want, and they want to. It's not just public schools, right? Obviously, they're coming for Social Security, they're coming for most public goods, and Charles Koch is like the face behind that. I think that segment of the movement. I also think there's the Christian authoritarians who don't care if it's a public school. They don't care if it's a charter school. They don't care as long as their curricula, that's like a Christian nationalist curricula, is taught there, they don't mind. So I think that's especially why they're interested in school board races, is because if they can just take over what already exists, then they don't need to defund it and go through the work of creating alternatives. I think that's also why they're like interested in funding private alternatives in Catholic or in Christian or in churches, so that they already have schools in a lot of those places, so they just hope to kind of like fund it with public tax dollars. But I think undermining the public good, yes, that is the ultimate goal of all of these sects. In some ways, that's sort of what unites them in the attacks against public education. But I don't think it necessarily needs to end for all of them with like the entire defunding of public education, but it would be the defunding of public education as we know it.
That's right. And the other topic that you had on one of your slides was the teacher union groups. There seems to be this antipathy against teacher unions, and how critical is that, and why is that such a big deal? I'm just going to say it. I mean, I was a principal for 28 years, and I had excellent teachers and I had not so great teachers. And we worked together to help them become better. Or if it was, didn't work out, then they did something else. But you worked together to change the system. Go ahead. I mean, unions, what's the...
Yeah, what's the deal? Unions, well, I think first and foremost, this has been a major attack vector for Charles Koch. I mean, since he founded his network, essentially, like unions have been the major target, or a major target for sure. And that's because of the power that they can wield, the people power. And if it was a major roadblock for him to get rid of public schools, which is a major goal of his. Now I think it's more of, unions sadly have lost a lot of power. But teachers unions are still like among the most powerful unions in our country. And I think that they're also a specter still for the libertarians, like unions, they're communist, they're whatever. So for them, I think it's part of just like the same old, same old. I don't know. I would say like for the Christian nationalists, Christian authoritarians, they just see them as like a roadblock against imposing like their own like curricula and what they want taught and the policies that they want in schools, since teachers unions tend to support the students' rights to like do what they, be who they are and promote equity. But that's my my 2 cents on the union.
Speaking of equity, there's a lot of research that points out that the original, quote, voucher movement started right after the Civil War, if you will, when with respect to segregation, and that we've been dealing with that whole issue since 1954 with the Brown versus Board of Education case that required integration, and that there were segregation academies that were set up in Virginia and so forth. And there's some worry that this movement is actually one that's fueled by a concern that some people don't want to have children from different backgrounds, races, social class, English language learners together, that we need to be separating them in order to appease or to fulfill someone else's certain biases, if you will. I mean, I don't know how much that plays into the information we have on the dark money, but the money ends up pushing certain agendas, and we end up with more of a segregated situation in some of our districts because we have siphoning up money to go off to different places, and then schools become little separate academies, if you will.
Yeah. I do think, there's already a lot of segregation in our public schools, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But I think absolutely the vouchers are going to exacerbate that even more, and charter schools will exacerbate that even more, um, particularly with what we know about charters and, not 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 encouraging like diversity of ability and along with that goes like racial discrimination as well. So I think yeah, it'll definitely be worse. I think we also need to consider, if we're considering our like utopian vision of what public schools should be like, how we can obviously, and I know a lot of very important people are working on this, but uh fixing the quality issues also in like our existing system.
Well, part of the issue is poverty. 15% of our students across the country live in poverty, and that's growing with the inequality that we have. And we have to recognize that that takes more than just education money. We've got to think about, the housing issues and the health issues and the other concerns that are impacting so many families. Before we turn it over to the Q&A with the group that is watching, I mean, the dark money is there. But if you're in a school board race and you're watching, you see flyers, you might see ads. How do you know who is representing who? And how do you keep track of dark money that's in these different independent expenditures? Maybe you could explain what an independent expenditure is and how that works here in Colorado and elsewhere. And how can the average citizen know whether the ad represents the beliefs of the values that they have versus maybe some billionaire who's supporting a certain way of running schools and wants a different way thing to happen?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, first of all, well, to answer your question about outside spending, that is spending that a PAC can make to support a candidate, but not in coordination with the candidate. So a lot of the mailers you see or the ads you see on TV, those are made by that is outside spending, or outside expenditures. And so you need to like there it will say which group or which PAC is funding that, but you need to like do a little research. So you can go on the FCC website and look for them. You can also go, there are state like expenditure databases that you can like just Google your state I, I don't know, maybe Mike, you could even like.
We have something called Tracer is our system in Colorado to keep track of that. But boy, the average person doesn't have time to look at that. And you have to know, for instance, in Denver, that's the only my place I know as well. The Better Leaders, Stronger Schools sounds great. And they are the group that has right now $700,000 in their coffers. And actually in the last election in 2023, they had 1.4 million that they spent on their candidates and they ended up winning. I mean, does money always win? Let me ask that question. Is that the statistic? If the money is there, they're going to win? I mean,
Well, let me just say, yeah, hold on that question for 1 second. But I will say, like, there are people writing about this in every state, and like, as important as the national stuff is, and I, obviously think that my job is pretty cool. I like it, and I think it's important. But I think it's like it's local people doing the research on the ground that really are making a difference, like you, Mike, because, and I'm sure there are many others on this call, because there's not enough people to go around to track every like local iteration of the national groups. And so just want to say thank you to you, Mike, and to everyone else doing that hard work. And I think you can just Google a group and probably something will come up because of people like you who are doing that hard work. If you want to know more about the national groups behind those, like you could look to our group, True North Research. There's, Judd Legum is awesome, his Popular Info, Substack, Center for Media and Democracy, Democracy Docket sometimes does some. So there are people writing on the national level, but yeah, usually there are people also doing the hard work at the local level. I think also like you can kind of tell their political stance sometimes based on their language, the parental rights stuff or anything obvious, anything. There's all some more obvious clues, like if they're talking about critical race theory or like that, or you know,
yeah, you're right. You're right. With to know what the messages are, and sometimes the messages are the same in that regard. The thing is, we've got to preserve public education, and when we think back to Milton Friedman in the 1950s, he was pushing this voucher idea all along, and right now I think we're worried that is taking hold for some reason because people don't understand what that means as we lose funding for our own public education system. And the DART money, when you talk about those names up there, how many of those organizations were actually behind this Project 2025? I mean, as I understand it, well, you go ahead. Who was behind that? And how is Project 2025, which is actually recommending that we dismantle public education? If you read it, it says we want to privatize it, that you just pick and choose where you're going to go.
Yeah. Yeah, I will say, I also just want to answer your last question or your other question too, because I think it's really important about does the spending matter? Because the spending does matter. But it seemed to matter more in national and state elections.
Yeah.
The money can buy a lot. They can buy attack ads against candidates. They can buy misleading talking points. They can buy a facade of grassroots support. They can buy more fundraising and outreach to billionaires. But at the local level, what we've seen in terms of like candidates supported by Moms for Liberty or 1776 Project is that they're not always winning. I think because people know the people that are running for school board. They know who they can trust a lot of times. Like they have a lot of local knowledge that kind of can't be bought or taught. And people don't like surprise they don't like when billionaires are coming and like buying their elections, and they don't want to see outside influencers coming to agitate at their school board meetings. They don't want to hear that students like lies about students dressing as cats or furries or whatever. Like they don't want that coming to their local town. Like we said, parents like their public schools and they don't want to see their kids impacted by this like national outside like
Local community voice.
yeah,
Yes.
that's what they want exactly. So I
Having a voice, having an elected board that our charter school networks don't have elected boards. The CEO of City Fund, who makes $500,000, sits on a charter school network that has 11 schools in the district, and where is his commitment to what's happening in those schools? Let's go to the questions that we've got here. We got a couple, and we can just throw them at you and see how we can do. I'm not sure. Let's just. Some of them may be easy to address, and some may be a little bit more not quite as easy. I'll just throw this one out. We've got one here. It says, how do we balance the reality that charters are a slippery slope towards privatization and shutting down schools that are serving families and students in systematically underserved communities isn't the move either. In Denver, charters have slipped into certain communities, often being asked by the district because they couldn't figure it out, and siphoned the families in those communities that know how to navigate school choice. I don't know whether you can speak to that one. That's more of a local question. But the question I'm hearing also is balancing the reality about charters and slippery slope. Maybe you can speak to that part a little bit.
Yeah. How do we balance the reality of charters or slippery slope toward privatization?
Oh, you can see it?
Yeah, yeah, yes, I can. I think that's a tough one to answer. Um, I think I think just talking to people that you know, I don't know, the
Yeah.
charters are, I mean, if you don't, I honestly feel like Mike, you might have a better answer to this because of your experience.
Well, I think the reality is we've had to close schools in Denver based on years past, it was on test scores because that was the reform movement. If your school was not achieving by a standardized test score measure, then they were subject to closure. And that was the norm. The current candidates who are running for school board in Denver have all said they would not support closing schools because of test scores or even declining enrollment. I think there's a shift that's going on. There's a realization that the community wants to be part of the education of the children and that they live around. And so we're kind of dealing with, we have a unique situation because 1/4 of our schools are in charters, and that's not the same across the country at all. Although it is in San Antonio. 50% of the students in San Antonio are in charter schools now, and that's part of that movement that's happened across the country. Let's go to another one here. In Virginia, it's not really a question, but someone's saying we've moved towards recruiting high quality candidates locally and at the state level and providing grassroots support. We also have been building coalitions of grassroots groups that band together. So that's one way that they're addressing the whole dark money issue so that people are aware of what's going on.
That's great.
Another question that may or may not be something you want to address, but I'll ask it anyway. How much of the push to privatize is closeted racism? I don't know if you have come across that in some of your research, if you want to speak to that.
Um, I don't know. I mean, it's to give an amount, I don't know, but I would say a lot of like Mike's historically speaking, a lot of the push towards vouchers, I think Mike just mentioned this, was explicitly about like the desegregation of schools. So, and I don't think that that's changed a ton. I think that for some segments of the population, it's you know, if your white kid is going to a low income school with a lot of brown kids, I think that there are parents who are want their kids to go, you know, to a better school, but also like there could be the elements of racism involved in that too. Um, and just socioeconomic like class issues too, you know. But yeah, I think that that could definitely be an element of that. I'm trying to think if there's like other ways of privatization that also could come into play, but I don't know if you have any ideas either, Mike.
No, I think there's some research related to the impact of that, and it depends on the community and the values that you're living with. I don't think that that's necessarily relevant in all cases at all. And the reality that you already pointed out is that many of our schools, just by nature of the housing history that we've had, end up being segregated. Denver went through a 25-year period of busing children in order to integrate our schools, and there were some significant successes because of that. We have some areas of our district that are more easily integrated. The school that I was at was very integrated, and we were able to have a wonderful experience for all those families. Let me just ask another question. Here's another comment. There's an organization that provides information and community to school board candidates, particularly those facing extremist opponents. Oh, you mentioned it, Democracy in Education. I think you talked about that. Did you not? Yeah.
No, that's great. I know Red, Wine, and Blue also has some, and I think there, yeah, there's another one too that I'm blanking on. But yeah, that's so great. Thanks for sharing.
There's a question here. Oh, the dark money group names in Denver. Well, the reality is Denver Families Action is the primary organization that receives money from two billionaires, John Arnold and Reed Hastings, and they are the political arm of Denver Families for Public Schools, and they've been around for 4 years. Prior to the money being given to them, it was given to an organization called Root Ed. They received over $34 million, not just for political organizing, though, but for community organization building to spread their message in order to increase the number of charter schools in our city. Let me just ask another follow-up to you, Alyssa. Dark money. Whenever we hear it, I was looking on the news the other day, and it was primarily this issue around the Democrats having dark money, and the Republicans were pushing back because, oh, you've got this dark money thing going on. School board elections, has this always been the case? Is it only since 2010? For instance, in Denver, you can give $2,500 to one candidate if you're an individual. But you can give much more money to this organization called Better Leaders, Stronger Schools. And we have the richest man in Colorado who's given $40,000 to that organization. Now, is that how it works? Because you have, I mean, how come those rules are different?
Yeah, because you can only give directly. A lot of states have you can only give directly to a candidate a certain amount, but it's the outside spending that you can spend whatever you want. So as long as you're not speaking to the candidate or the candidate's campaign and coordinating with them, you can spend unlimited amounts of money supporting them or supporting the policies that they support. That's the difference. So you can, a dark money group can go out and spend, $1 million on a local school board if they wanted to, on billboards and ads, supporting that candidate or demonizing another candidate running against them. And that's for some billionaires, for billionaires, that's a drop in the bucket if they really care about turning the school board.
Are changing what's happening in that city to be reflective of what their values are, which is what you were saying earlier. It's a sad situation if we're letting the community give up their voice to the voices of those people from outside the city or outside the school district, which is a real concern that's happening even now. Yeah. That's a big deal. Any last words that you'd like to give us for those of us who are trying to keep track of all this? I mean, you do it on a daily basis. I know school board elections typically were never this way. I mean, we didn't have this kind of money. I was doing the history, and this kind of money wasn't there back in 2005 and 2007. And how is it more because the billionaires have more? I mean, why has it gotten so expensive? We broke a record, 2.3 million in our city, and yet you've got some little districts that are doing well to raise several hundred dollars. Excuse me.
Yeah, it's awful. I mean, I do think it has to do with economic disparities. I mean, if as wealth is consolidated in fewer and fewer hands, it's increasingly just a drop in the bucket for them. Like Elon Musk also, poured millions and millions of dollars into earlier this year there was a Supreme Court race in Wisconsin. He was just randomly throwing millions of dollars into he has no connection there other than like some Tesla lawsuit, but he wanted to flip the, or he wanted to flip the, or no, to make sure that the Supreme Court didn't go liberal. And that was, nothing for him. And so like you were saying, Mike, too, with the schools, like the socioeconomic disparities matter at the school board level, and they matter in terms of like the billionaires influencing our elections, because if you have one person that has billions of dollars, then it's really nothing to them to flip a local school board election that doesn't have any bearing on their lives, but has bearing on many people's lives that cannot afford, they're spending their money on food and rent, and they can't think about spending $10 on the school board race, never mind millions of dollars.
Yeah, I'll just, that's an excellent point. And the disparity is really growing as we learn every day. Uh, there were a couple of the comments about the rural suburban city locations affecting the privatization choices, and that's a reality. That's just accurate. It is. It does reflect. There's no question about that. And the other issue that was brought up a couple of times is the issue of transparency and accountability. I think primarily transparency. How are some of these other systems, charter school systems, using their money, and why do we not know about the grants? Mackenzie Scott, who gives $4 million to certain groups, certain charter schools, and there's a difference in the amount of money per pupil that some charter school networks have compared to the local neighborhood school. And so those kind of concerns, I think we still are working on in our own state and everywhere. Alyssa, you've been amazing in terms of the background information that you provided. Is there a way we can keep track of you and what you've done? I mean, where do we go? We can put this information on our website. It's called True North Research. Is that the group that we want to keep track of and follow? Do you have articles or information there that we can learn from?
Yeah, absolutely. We're in the process of updating our website, so it's a little backlogged. But yeah, you can, oh, thank you for sharing my website, Rob. That's my personal professional website, also truenorthresearch.org. Courtaccountability.org is our sister organization, our advocacy arm. So they do amazing work around transparency in the courts. And yeah, I have articles on Truth Out if you're interested, just Google Truth Out or write truthout.org and Alyssa Bowen if you want to find those. But yeah, I just really appreciate you having me on, Mike. And I again, thank you and everyone else who's doing the hard local work.
Thank you, Alyssa. A few words before we sign off. I just want to thank those who were able to join us this evening. This is a big topic. We just scratched the surface. You need to know that. Dark Money was the title of a book by Jane Meyer. There's a movie, two movies that HBO has produced called The Dark Money Game. I teased Alyssa about that. I've seen it. She hasn't. So she's going to see it soon because she's waiting to see it with a friend. We have Democracy in Chains, which is written by Nancy McLean, which explains the history of the dark money influence, especially from the Koch network, which has its tentacles throughout. Koch brothers and the Coors family both supported Project 2025. And there's a lot of research that you can find also on our website. We will have this video available on our website. We don't have a webinar scheduled next month at this time, but we really thank you for joining us, those of you who were able to be with us this evening. And a big thank you to Alyssa and Rob Rogers who helped put this together. And so with that, we will sign off, and everybody have a great evening and enjoy the rest of your time. Thank you.